It seems like there's an epidemic of Tommy John or UCL reconstructive surgeries going on with young pitchers these days throughout the minor leagues, major leagues. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's, a combination of things. It could be, poor mechanics. It could be, they're putting stress on places where they, on the elbow instead of using their shoulder more. Opening up, putting a lot of stress on the elbow area. And it's overuse when you're tired or when you're trying to push through a game, and you're fatigued, and you don't have. What happens when you're tired? You start to, you have to. What you try to do is you try to compensate. And when you compensate, you try to compensate. When you compensate, you end up using other parts of your arm, your elbow. When you're tired in your shoulder, you're gonna maybe throw a little bit 3/4 so you won't feel it. When you do that, that's when you end up getting hurt. But it's a combination of things. I think primarily it's definitely the mechanics where you see guys maybe flying open a little bit too early and they're putting so much stress on that elbow, on that ligament, and that's where it's happening. I mean, it's what happened to me. Wear and tear of poor mechanics over time. I think that definitely caused me to have the surgery that I had to have.
Now, tell me about the long and grueling rehab process that you go through.
It's definitely long and grueling. After the surgery, there's a period of time where it's just rest and healing, and then slowly you begin the rehab, and it's a lot of ultrasound in the beginning, stretching, which then leads to doing therapy where you're trying to get your range of motion back. You're trying to get your arm, so when you come out of the surgery you can barely bend your arm, and then it's a period of time before you finally get a good range of motion. And then it's a lot of strengthening. I did a lot of buckets of rice where I'm actually in there grinding away, trying to work on those muscles that protect the elbow, protect the ligament. And then gradually you start throwing, and it takes a long time before you start to get your velocity back, to get your strength back, and it's a grinding rehab. But what we've seen today with a lot of these pitchers now, they come back and they're actually stronger and they throw harder after the rehab than they were before they got hurt.
Now, the two interesting cases that I find this year, both Chris Medlin and Brandon Beachy go down for the second time. They've already had one surgery, and now they're up for another one.
Again, I think it goes back to mechanics. Where you're putting stress and strain on a certain part of the arm that you can't support it, and you just can't keep cranking it. And we here at the school teach kids keeping your shoulder closed, getting on top, using the back of your shoulder. But with the amount of innings that these pitchers throw, and the amount of stress and the torque they put on their arms, I think that's what ends up doing it. And then your arm can only take so much punishment. If it's being abused in the wrong area, it's going to break down.
Now, I wonder if the lower age of when guys are being called up to the major leagues has anything to do with that. You see Steven Strasburg and Jose Fernandez, guys like that, coming up when they're 20, 21, 22 years old.
And I think they get up there, and obviously when you first get into the big leagues, you're nervous and you want to do well, so you start to overthrow, and all these things accumulate. When you overthrow, you fly open. When you fly open, you end up putting stress on your elbow. But I think if you look at these guys and maybe you analyze their mechanics, you'll see certain flaws in their mechanics. And then there's other pitchers that come up and when they're 19 or 20 and they pitch till they're in their late 30s and they never have an elbow issue. And again, it's everybody's different. Some guys have bad mechanics and they pitch a long time with bad mechanics, so it's also genetic too, I think, in many ways. But I kind of contribute it to mechanics. If you're throwing the proper way and you're putting stress and pressure on the certain part of your shoulder where you should be putting it, then it's taking away the strain that goes on your elbow. We hear all the time about kids that are 12 or 13 how they should throw curveballs, which I agree with. To a certain point, if a kid is mature enough and old enough to understand how to throw a curveball, you don't throw a curveball and put any stress on your elbow. The stress in a curveball is on your shoulder. I mean, it's here and you're feeling it on the back of your shoulder, but you can go to any Little League field throughout Rhode Island, and you'll see kids throwing curveballs the wrong way, where they're putting stress and pressure on their elbow. And that's where they end up coming up with soreness, and they get stiff, and maybe they come up with tendonitis, which is the first, the beginning of maybe a serious issue later on.
So, in order to prevent things like that, I know you're speaking about mechanics. There are certain stretching drills and warm-up things that you go through.
And that's another thing too. I mean, sometimes, yes, you have to warm up and you have to stretch and you need to be heated up before you start throwing. You have some of these cold weather games that we have here in March and April where the weather's cold, and pitchers are out there and they're trying to get loose, and again now they start throwing a number of pitches. They get late into the game, they get fatigued, plus they're not heated anymore because of it's getting cold. So you're battling that too, where your arm stiffens up a little bit and you're tired. It's just all of that kind of comes into the formula for disaster.
Exactly. Another thing, getting prepared for the long season. Obviously, there's spring training, and they go through drills and bullpens in that regard. Are there any other things that you do to mentally prepare yourself for the long season, or?
Yeah, it's a long season. I mean, and number one, you can't think about getting hurt. You can't worry about getting hurt, or you've got to train yourself to be prepared for the first day of spring training. Because the first day of spring training, you're throwing off a mound. You're throwing probably 30, 40, 50 pitches, and then you're throwing off a mound again 2 days later. And if you're somebody who's trying to make the team, you don't have a lot of opportunity. Your window is very short, so you're trying to get in there, do what you're capable of doing, prove to everybody that you can pitch at that level. But now it's not just in the old days they would go to spring training to get ready. Now you've got to be ready the day you show up, and it's you're throwing in January. When you think about it, you're already off a mound throwing in January to get ready for the second week of February, and the season now goes all the way into September. The big league season goes all the way into October. So it's a long season. It's a grind. It's a physical and mental challenge on you. And not only do you have to be prepared physically with the right mechanics, but you've got to be mentally prepared to kind of get yourself ready for every game. Especially if you're a relief pitcher. I was a relief pitcher, so you had to go. I pitch 80 games, 75, 80 games a year. You got to be prepared to kind of go into every game and be at the top, the top form.
Now, speaking of being a relief pitcher, what was that like, getting the call in the bullpen and you have to get up and just start warming up right away?
I remember we were in San Francisco, and I had a teammate of mine who was from California, and this was maybe late May, early June. In San Francisco, Candlestick Park back then, it would be freezing. It could be June and it would be cold. It was always cold at Candlestick. And I remember it being around the 6th or 7th inning, and I was a relief pitcher, and I remember I was standing up. And being from New England, the last thing you want to do when you're cold is sit still. You want to move around. You want to just tap your toes, or you want to do a sprint here and there to kind of keep yourself going, kind of keep your heart rate going. And I remember this teammate of mine from Southern California was just sitting there with all these layers of blankets on him, and he was sitting there, and I said, "You need to get up. You need to get your blood flowing." And that's, to me, it was always the key. Was always, when the phone rings, you need to be ready. Not, again, physically, you need to be stretched. Get a little bit of a heat going. If it's getting down on the ground and stretching out your legs, or doing a couple sprints just to kind of get yourself ready. Because for me, I always wanted to be ready when the phone rang. And there's no excuse for not to be ready. That's your job.
Exactly. And then at the other end of the spectrum, when you're done your appearance and you're out of the game, what are some things that you do to cool back down, if anything?
Well, a lot of pitchers, especially in the '90s, it really became the thing. With the Job exercises, Dr. Job, who did the first Tommy John surgery, every pitcher would do their Job exercises. So if I pitched 2 or 3 innings in a game, I was in the trainer's room right after I got done pitching, doing my set of exercises to work on the back of my shoulder, and then I would ice. So that it becomes commonplace now that a lot of these pitchers, that's what they're doing. They're getting their work, and they're out there pitching in the game, and then they're actually they get their Job exercises done, they get their routine done that they need to do, and then they would ice.